Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everybody. Welcome to another session of Chai, Coffee and Research with me and today with my colleague Kashif Raza. It's 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning in Lahore, Pakistan, and it's 10 p.m. on a Saturday night in Calgary. Is that correct, Kashif?
Correct.
So thank you so much for making time for us so late on a Saturday night for you. And I know people will be joining. Sunday is a slow day in Pakistan, so we expect people to join in. And of course, as usual, this session will go live on Facebook, and it will also be put on the YouTube channel Naziha Ali at the end of the session.
Sure.
Now, allow me to introduce Kashif. Kashif is not just a colleague, but he is also a friend. Kashif is a sessional instructor and a doctoral researcher at the University of Calgary, Canada. And he specializes in leadership, policy, and governance. Kashif has previously taught in Pakistan, USA, Qatar, and Canada, and now in Canada. His research interests include language policy and planning, political economy of immigrant languages, so interesting, TESOL leadership, program administration, and bi, pluri, and multilingualism. This is how I get to know Kashif because we've done some collaborative work and we're still working on some collaborative projects around the issues associated with multilingualism. And we'll have a little bit of conversation around that. Kashif is the chief editor of Policy Development in TESOL and Multilingualism, Past, Present, and the Way Forward. This is a publication by Springer in 2021, and Handbook of Multilingual TESOL in Practice, which should be on the shelves in March 2020, inshallah. At the moment, Kashif is also the co-chair-elect of Program Administration Intersection of TESOL International Association. So once again, welcome, Kashif. Thank you so much for making time at such an odd time for you. Not really odd for us. We are at early morning on a Sunday, so some of us are still asleep and some of us are here. Would you like to say something before we begin?
Sure. Well, thank you for the invitation. I think I was just so excited to be part of this conversation that I just didn't realize the time difference. So I'm really looking forward to it. And thanks for the nice introduction. Really appreciate it.
Thank you again. So Kashif, as we begin, I'd first like to let everybody know what your chapter contribution has been in our publication. So as most of our colleagues and friends here know that this publication, English Language Teaching in Pakistan, a lot of our sessions in Chai, Coffee and Research with Naziha Ali are based around the chapters published in this publication and my conversations with the authors in this publication. Now, your chapter was primarily focused around policy development, education policies, education in English policies. So naturally, our conversation today will be around policies in English language education. Now, first of all, I think I would like you to start by defining policies so that we can, have a mutual understanding of where you're coming from when you talk about education in English policies. So I'll let you start speaking, and perhaps start by defining policy and then policy discourse so that we can steer the discussion forward.
Sure, thank you. So I think the term policy, even the research in the way the term policy has been seen, especially language policy, has evolved over the last few decades. So it started with for example, late in the 90s, people started working on language policy and then seeing how after World War, different countries started devising their language policies to maintain the dominance of certain languages in certain countries. So I think the research in language policy started from there. But then later on, we've seen that policy can be taken as a text where people look at documents. For example, it could be government documents, or it could be a national level policy, for example, Pakistan's national policy. It could come down to institutional level where people look at institutional policy and what medium of instruction an institution has adapted as the way to go. But then policy can also be a discourse. It's not always in written form. So this is a policy that people create based upon their preferences, based upon their agendas, based upon their objectives. For example, a policy can be created by a teacher in the classroom. For example, in Pakistan, we do not have a written language in education policy. So a teacher has the freedom to decide whether they want to go just in English or just in one of the local languages or a combination of different languages. I often give example at international platforms of our court system in Pakistan. For example, when I was trained as a lawyer, I was taught that I should be preparing for an English court system. So all the applications we prepared and all the materials we prepared were in English. But when you go to the court, you see that the lawyer is interacting with the client in Punjabi, in Urdu, in Sindhi, and other languages. And when you appear before a judge, you are communicating with the judge in Urdu, Urdu, Punjabi, Sindhi, and other languages. And then the judgment comes out in English. So what we see is that there's a discourse of the court which is developing. No one has defined that policy in written form that you can file an application in Urdu, but the decision must come in English. Since English is the official language of the country, so the judgments do come in English. I have never seen a judgment coming out in Urdu, although the entire process happens in Urdu and Punjabi, for example, in Lahore High Court or in lower courts like Session Courts. So I think that's how policy can be seen at different levels. And that's what I've tried to do in my own chapter as well, that I've tried to bring attention to different ways of forming policy, different ways of implementing policy, and different ways of interpreting or reviewing policy, and especially the policy agents that contribute to policy formation, implementation, and review. For example, as English language teachers, we are the agents who are interpreting the policy in our classroom and then implementing it based upon different factors. I mean, especially that when there is no policy in written form, people have the freedom, like I said earlier. So when we do research on policy, I think we should treat it as a discourse, not always as a text, because it eliminates other forms of policy that is in practice in the field of English language teaching and just language teaching, I would say.
Thank you. That's quite insightful. Now, what stands out for me is the why of having or not having a policy. I think you mentioned a couple of critical things here. The first thing that strikes me with your example of being a law student is that the purpose of communication is defeated with issuing a verdict in English in a country that is primarily either Punjabi or full of regional languages. We do say English is our official language in Pakistan, but in many ways it is not, because except for the privileged elite, or I'm not sure how else to categorize that, nobody really communicates in English. So it defeats the purpose of communication. And then my second focus would be on policy agents, because that seems to be a critical stakeholder in whether policies are implemented in a context or not. So for me, that is key. Now, having spoken about these things, what have you seen? Do we have enough research on language policies in our context in Pakistan, or are we still getting there?
I think there is work being done, and there is a lot of work being done by different people at different levels. So in my chapter, if you allow me to just talk about the takeaways from the chapter, and then I think we can have a conversation maybe about all of those points. So the first thing in the chapter that I pointed to is, again, different forms, types, and places of policy formation, implementation, and review. For example, the National Education Policy Framework identifies 3 types of institutions in Pakistan. So we got public institutions, which are run by government, and then we got private schools and private institutions, which are, run by private organizations or entities. And then we got madaris, like where our religious centers, where especially students from lower economic backgrounds go there. So when we look at policy, I think one of the point I wanted to make in the chapter is that when we are using Pakistan as an umbrella term, we have to be a little bit careful of how we are either including or excluding different forms of or different types of education systems within Pakistan. For example, when we're doing research on private institutions, then there should be a specific way of saying that this research is limited to private institutions, not entire Pakistan. So using Pakistan as an umbrella term has been a term which has been, or maybe an approach which has been bothering me with some of the literature I've reviewed in the chapter. So I've pointed to that in the chapter. The second thing I think what I've pointed to is that when I wrote this chapter, Pakistan did not have a written policy, which we still don't, although we have that single national curriculum, but I think we're still struggling with the policy. So I pointed to 3 different challenges that Pakistan has had until today. So the first one was historical, and we go back to the history of English in the subcontinent, and then history of English in Pakistan, and how the colonial agendas have tried to maintain English as the medium of education, which has resulted in creating 2 types of education systems, one for the elite, which gets education in English medium institutions, and then for everybody else, where you are supposed to use, or you can use, your local languages like Urdu, Punjabi, and other languages. So the historical development of policy is an area which needs some investigation. And there's a lot of work which has been done. I think if I respond to your question, I think most of the research has focused on historical development of language policy. And unfortunately, the other 2 areas which some people have identified, but they still remain undiscovered, are the linguistic and political reasons for lack of policy development or lack of consistency in policy development. For example, in terms of linguistic challenges, Pakistan has 72 recognized languages, according to CIA fact book. And then maintaining a language policy that makes all these language speakers happy is not easy. It is going to be challenges, because you will definitely disappoint some people at some level if they are not included in policy development. So the linguistic diversity in the country has been a challenge in creating a policy. And then finally, politics. I think language-based politics has been very disadvantageous for the country, especially when people associate their political agendas with different language developments and promotions. For example, we've seen movements where people are asking to create provinces based on language. We've seen the East Pakistan and West Pakistan controversy, and how language was one of the factors in the separation of the country. So that political aspect also needs to be investigated. I think one good study could look at how different political parties have looked at language policy during their periods, and then see how language policy has changed within or during the reigns of different political parties, and see whether they had any political agendas behind either creating or not creating a language policy. So, I mean, turning to those challenges, maybe some future research can investigate all 3 of them, either in combination or in isolation from each other. Then last thing which I pointed out in the chapter is the direction for future research. So a lot of research I have read or included in my critical review in the chapter promotes some kind of competition between languages. For example, English versus Urdu, Urdu versus Punjabi, Urdu versus Pashto, Urdu versus Seraiki, and Punjabi versus Seraiki. For example, there are people who have started writing papers where they're trying to prove why Seraiki is not a language, it's a dialect. I think that those are controversial areas. We have to be careful how we position or what kind of how we are seeing diversity in the country. So the research that promotes cooperation between languages, collaboration between languages needs to be done and needs to be promoted in institutions and outside of institutions. So some of the work which I reviewed in the paper does point to that competition, does point to the kind of one language being superior to the other language. For example, why we need to learn English and why we not need to learn some other languages. And the second point I've made is there's a lot of focus on what needs to be done rather than how it needs to be done. So I think we need to twist that focus. We need to provide more examples of how things need to be done. For example, when we started working on the edited volumes that you gave example of in the introduction, so we started with the theoretical discussion in language policy development in TESOL and multilingualism. What we wanted to see is, or what we wanted to do is highlight the tensions that are dominant in research on TESOL and multilingualism. So once we had done that, we turned to the practical aspect of it. So the second volume, which is coming in March 2023, hopefully, includes 33 examples of how multilingual TESOL actually works in the classroom, at curriculum level, at assessment level, and at policy level. So I think some of the work in the future could possibly or probably focus more on how things need to be done rather than what needs to be done, so that research in this area can go beyond simple proposals to actual examples. And I think people are coming out with examples these days, especially these recent graduates from universities are doing some quality work. So I think that work just needs to be surfaced at international level in quality journals, so people across the world can also see what kind of work is being done. And finally, a balanced approach that looks at diversity from a different perspective, where diversity is not seen as a problem but a resource and a blessing. So we should be promoting diversity and we should be accepting diversity. And I think this tone needs to be dropped, that diversity is difficult to manage. Yes, there are challenges in dealing with diverse communities, diverse language groups, but diversity is not a threat to unity. I think we can continue to live in our own ways, but through shared values, through shared understanding, where we respect each other. And I think a good example of that could be some work done in different contexts, like Canada. There's a lot of work being done in this context where people are maintaining multilingualism at social level, while the government maintains bilingualism at the federal and some provincial levels. So I think those were some takeaways from the book, and we can definitely have a discussion about all of them.
Definitely very, very interesting. I appreciate that you outlined the entire chapter, because a lot of our conversation today emanates from the chapter itself, which is the base of our discussion. Now, one of the things that I started thinking about as you were talking is the lack of consistency. Why is there so much lack of consistency in our language policies? This might be a political stance, but I've lived in Pakistan for about almost 4 years now, and I'm still figuring out, I'm living the lack of consistency in our context in terms of policies in education. You've done some research there, so perhaps you're in a better position to say something about it.
I think it goes back to those three challenges that I outlined in the chapter: the historical challenges, political, and linguistic. So historically, we have seen political polarization in the country and lack of consistency in, you know, um, democracy in the country, I could say. So we've seen so many challenges as a country that it's hard to, even for example, none of our prime ministers has finished their tenure. So which is a sad history of the country. But also that our political parties have not prioritized language maintenance or linguistic diversity as part of their political agendas. So I think as researchers, what we could do is probably contribute to increasing awareness of people. For example, most of my work in Pakistan's context is about collaboration between languages rather than competition. So if we talk about where things are similar rather than where things are different, I think we may have a better way. We may come to a better understanding of things. For example, I was giving an example of Punjabi and French in one of my classes the other day. I have never thought that there would be any relationship between Punjabi and French. So one thing I learned recently is that pineapple is called anana in French and it's ananas in Punjabi. And same thing in Urdu and Hindi. So when I was teaching in Qatar, we were actually linking between different languages. We were trying to create a classroom where all different types of languages are accepted and with respect. So I think that's where we can begin.
Okay, sorry, I lost you for a couple of seconds in between. I'm not sure if it was just me or if it was everybody, but I can see you now. So I think that's a good point to start. Kashif, just for the benefit of the audience, is your research on multilingualism and collaboration between languages focused on Pakistan? Because I know you worked in the Arab world for quite a while, and now you're in Calgary. So what context is your research focused on? Is it primarily Pakistan? Have we lost Kashif? Okay, let's find him. Technological glitches, part of life. I'm just texting him.
Oh, sorry.
Are you back? Okay, that's okay. I thought being in Pakistan, I might be in trouble with technology because around this time, you know, there's a power cut for about an hour, but I'm here. Okay, did you get part of my question? Sorry?
I think it was my connection, sir.
Okay, that's okay. We found you. Did you catch my last question or did you miss it altogether?
No, I think I missed it.
Okay, so what I wanted to know for the benefit of the audience is whether your research on multilingualism and collaboration between languages is focused primarily on the Pakistani context or general, because we know that you lived and worked in the Arab world for quite a while, and that's where you originally started this research on multilingualism, and now you're in Calgary. So what exactly is the context of your research in terms of languages?
I think yeah, you're right. It did start from Qatar, where I was working for 8.5 years. And I think it goes beyond borders. It goes beyond a specific context and specific country. So I've done work which promotes collaboration between English, Arabic, and other languages in Qatar. And in Pakistan, same thing. I've done work on CPAC, and where I'm trying to highlight that the way Mandarin is being promoted in the country at the cost of Urdu and Punjabi and other languages is creating feelings of hatred towards the language. There's no harm in learning new languages for different reasons, for educational reasons, for economic reasons, and political reasons. But the way those languages are promoted at the cost of other languages is problematic. So again, it's promoting collaboration. In Canadian context, for example, looking at the way different languages are helping immigrants, especially newcomers, integrate in Canada. And my research is focused on South Asians in Calgary, especially in one specific area of Calgary, and how multilingualism is playing a role in their integration in the areas of economy, politics, health, and society. So it goes beyond a specific border, and it's talking about collaboration across different contexts and across different countries.
Okay, that's interesting. So you'd be looking at languages like Punjabi, Hindi, South Indian languages, regional languages in Pakistan, all of that. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. I mean, in terms of South Asians, for example, my work, some of my work, which has already come out, has looked at the collaboration between South Asians, for example, because of the cultural, historical, and other, shared, I would say, history between some of the South Asian countries like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, specifically. We are able to communicate in a mixed variety of language, which hasn't been named yet, but it's just like a shared linguistic repertoire that we always draw from. For example, I may be able to speak with somebody from Nepal because they have learned some Hindi from Indian movies, or some of them have visited Nepal. So I have a colleague, or have had colleagues in the US, where I was able to communicate with them in some mixed variety of Urdu, Hindi, and Nepali, and Punjabi maybe. And one of the magazine article that I published in 2020, I guess, did give an example of where I was working with a Nepali colleague in the compound where I was living, and we were trying to get a kind of piece of wood as a shelf. So I told him that I think his name was Raju. So I said, Raju, mujhe ek phatta chahiye. And then he was just looking at me like, what is phatta? And then this is more of Punjabi. So we're going back and forth, and I'm trying to explain to him that a phatta looks like a plank of wood, and like it has to be this wide and this long, and I need a few nails and holes in the wall and a drill machine. So we were just going back and forth. We were able to communicate in a mixed variety, which had English in it, which had Hindi in it, which had Urdu in it, which had Punjabi in it. You could say that they were words, but they were sentence structure. They were, cultural references. So there were so many resources that we were pulling to have conversations like those. Same thing happened with a lot of my Bangladeshi colleagues in that context. So through that work, I have tried to promote collaboration between languages, which unfortunately, if we go to South Asia, we see a lot of polarization based on language, that if you are, for example, in Pakistani parliament, you're not supposed to use Hindi words. And we can see what's happening in India in terms of Urdu, or in other contexts. So my work is going beyond those controversies and trying to promote collaboration between people across different South Asian contexts or countries, and also in different places where South Asians immigrate.
I think what comes to mind based on what you've just said is the current research that you and I are collaborating on, because the fact that it just stems from this example. I want to talk about this now because this is what's happening in Pakistan in a lot of, let's say, not just privileged context. This is Pakistan right now. A lot of us communicate in Urdu, English, Punjabi. It's a mix. We use all the linguistic resources that we possess, and it's not just in academia. I've become so much more aware of the fact that house help, generally vendors, people on the street, anyone you meet, has some linguistic resource of English, Punjabi, and their own regional language. And that is what communication in the new age in Pakistan is like. It's not considered strange. It's just a given. Nobody gets surprised if someone who has never gone to school speaks to you with a few words of English interspersed in their Punjabi. Nobody gets surprised. I think I'm the only one who kept getting surprised until I started researching multilingualism and translingualism. But this seems to be a given nowadays. And that's the reason I got interested in something that you and I worked on already about how students in universities consider it fashionable to utilize their complete linguistic resource, whereas they study in English as a medium of instruction institutions. So I think I'm also trying to understand how this variation extends beyond Pakistan, because, you know, you just said a few minutes ago how there is lack of consistency in accepting or implementing policies. But at the same time, in implementing policies in a country like Pakistan, which is so rich with language variations, we are neglecting those variations. We are completely overlooking the fact that as I speak, everybody in this country has a linguistic resource, not only of what exists in Pakistan, but also English language.
Indeed, I think this may be controversial and people may disagree with it, but I think the way we use statistical data in Pakistan also need to be relooked at. For example, looking at languages in isolation from the social reality of the country or reality of classrooms is, I think, injustice to that context. For example, a lot of research that isolates English language usage in let's say public institutions where there's, you know, translation method is very common and teachers education, qualification, language proficiency are problematic. So that's where you will not see only English being used by teachers. So just looking at English in isolation from other languages, I think will not provide a complete picture. And the second thing I want to say is the data which we see being referred to again and again by research, some researchers, not all, is, for example, English is spoken by 6% of people in Pakistan. Urdu is spoken by 7% of people in Pakistan. I think those, I would like to disagree with that number, because anyone who goes to school, whether they go to a public school, a private school, or madaris, should, or I would, in my experience, are able to speak somewhat of Urdu. So now we're getting into who qualifies as an Urdu speaker or not an Urdu speaker, and what is the level. And if we are setting a standard, I think we may be isolating a lot of people who qualify as multilinguals or plurilinguals or translinguals, and just, you know, using that standardization that some countries like Canada have started using, where you have to pass IELTS with a particular grade, with a particular band to qualify as an immigrant. So I think those numbers need to be relooked at. Those numbers do not really reflect the social reality. I know people look at 7% Urdu speakers as their mother tongue, but a person like me who grew up in Punjab, who grew up in Sargodha, speaking Urdu, Punjabi, and some Sindhi as my mother tongues. So I had multiple mother tongues. I did not have one mother tongue. There is push for having one mother tongue, which I think this research on translingualism, multilingualism, in my point of view, does confront, does question. So, and especially there is a lot of research being done on emerging bilinguals, and they need to be identified as bilinguals who are speaking two tongues from childhood. So I think if we look at these languages from that perspective, then those numbers become controversial. Those numbers become a little bit of questionable. So going back to your question of why there is so much controversy and why there is research which is not advancing, I think we as researchers need to discourage research which dismisses other types of research, which dismisses particular ways of looking at people, particular ways of looking at languages, and that's how we can promote collaboration between languages rather than competition. So I hope I answered that question.
You did, and I'm hoping we will move in that direction, because a lot of things, I do not think that any of us in today's time and context can claim to be just mono or bilinguals. My own experiences are similar. My first language was Hindi, interspersed with Sanskrit, because I never grew up in Pakistan. I had to be tutored in Urdu for it to become my first language, because my mom got paranoid thinking, what are the children learning? My first school was an Indian school. And I think, and that's where the love of languages grew, because you know, you start to see a little bit of difference, whereas everybody else in the world thinks, well, Hindi and Urdu are the same, but they are in fact, they're not. The script is different, the text is different, the vocabulary is different. So, but the world generally tends to think that these are the same languages. And another thing I want to mention is you know, in my experience, came across students who had migrant backgrounds from other countries in the world, not necessarily Pakistan. I highlighted things like Irish Punjabi, Scottish Punjabi, and they were amused by the terminology, because this is something I identified. And I think we need to do a little bit more research in other contexts about how Punjabi or Urdu gets influenced, because a lot of people that I meet on my travels, and if they speak Punjabi or Urdu, it is not with the Punjabi or Urdu accent anymore. It's not with the accent that we are aware of in Pakistan. It's got that regional accent of where they've lived. So that might be another area to investigate. Now, having made that, sorry, go on.
No, I think there is a lot of research being done on native speakerism. I know it's mostly focused on English, but you are right. I think that also needs to be expanded or stretched to other languages. For example, Urdu language speakers, if you speak Urdu with a particular accent, you are labeled as you know, Pendu Urdu speaker, or Punjabi Urdu speaker, or Sindhi Urdu speaker, or Pathan Urdu speaker, or something like that. I think that labeling needs to be dismantled, and that labeling needs to be confronted by researchers and scholars. And of course, there's work needs to be done. I think some work is emerging. It just needs to be surfaced at international level. Like I said, that work needs to come in international journals, so that, I mean, Pakistani scholars or academia, which is not just in Pakistan but across the globe, can also benefit from it and then refer to it in their own research.
That's right. And in recent years, there has been a lot of floating around of this word, these two terms, multilingualism and translingualism, and people are actually organizing conferences around these themes now. So that's exciting. Now, I know people are beginning to put in comments, so this might be a good time to start asking our audience about you know, maybe to interact with you directly for whatever they want to say. But before we do that, I have one more question for you, and then I can let you interact directly so we can get some more views, because I see a lot of them are from Pakistan or have taught in Pakistan for a while. So earlier on in your conversation, you said something about policy agents, and I'm assuming that referred to teachers, institutional administration, and on a larger scale, perhaps those who make decisions about what EMIs or what mediums of instructions are to be integrated into our educational systems. So I want to talk about the policy agent in the classroom, or the teacher. What do you think can teachers do to integrate the use of multiple languages? Or perhaps I'm trying to shift your focus to a little bit to the translingual pedagogy. So what do you think teachers can do to optimize this learning experience?
I think I want to go back to your comment about multilingualism and translanguaging becoming very dominant. They are becoming very fancy and buzzwords. And I think there is a pushback now of being careful of how those terms are being used. So if multilingualism of some sort is promoting specific languages at the cost of other languages, I think it goes back to promoting colonial agendas of suppressing some languages while promoting some others. So I think, and also some people associate translation with multilingualism or translingualism. My own work has been a bit critical of translation and how that we need to be careful of how we are bringing translation method as an alternative of translingual or multilingual pedagogy. So in my work, I've always highlighted that translation could be a starting point. You can translate things to get students started, but it should not be the dominant teaching and learning style in the classroom. For example, my own work in Qatar has highlighted how I decided to use Arabic in the classroom, where students were able to get started, but they have to come back to English, which is the target language. So I'm using their resources developed in different languages, bringing them to the classroom and making English just as another language. So I think one of the challenges that teachers have, I think going back to your question, is creating English as an elite language, which is from a different universe, from a different country, and then you have to create a specific environment to learn English, which isolates other languages, which makes it a superior language, which makes it the only language that needs to be learned, which makes it the most difficult language in the world to learn. So I think as teachers, we need to confront those ideologies, we need to confront those ways of thinking, and then treat English as just another language that needs to be learned. And I think we could do that by creating language classrooms where students feel comfortable. They feel comfortable in making mistakes. They feel comfortable in trying. They feel comfortable throwing words of their own language when they get stuck or when they need help. That's what translanguaging is promoting, that you shuttle between languages, like Suresh Kanagaraja says. So you go from one language to another language because that's how you can communicate better. And I think if you create artificial classrooms where you are trying to project that English cannot exist with other languages, then you have not been to society, or maybe you need to go back to society and open up your eyes and see how different languages are being used by different people to get things done. And I think that's where our work, which we have done as in terms of our volumes, becomes important, that we first try to confront theoretical ideologies or ideologies in terms of theory of how language policy is seen as English only or something only versus multilingualism, and then providing examples. I've posted a paper or a link to that paper in the chat. So in this paper, we have tried to look at the nuts and bolts of policy. I think they should be freely available through ResearchGate, if you're a member, or I think you should still be able to download. If anyone has any challenges, I think I can send a PDF to you and then you can share it. So in that paper, what we tried to do is look at policy at the macro level, and then how that policy at the macro level creates an environment, which that environment is actually created by policy agents, the way they interpret that policy. And then it comes to meso level, again, an environment is created by interpreters or policy agents. And then it comes to micro level. So if we bring classroom to a micro level, then teachers are the policy agents. They decide how they want to interpret the policy, how much flexibility they want to have in terms of what language is permitted and what language is not. I mean, I've come across a lot of people who say, I will not allow my students to use their mother tongue in the classroom because you don't learn English that way. So I think monolingual TESOL is a controversial way of looking at English language teaching. It has been addressed in different at different platforms by different people. For example, our own work, and then there is work which is beyond just our work, and there's a lot of work out there which is interpreted TESOL as a multilingual field rather than a monolingual field. So, and I think some of the examples we've put together in our upcoming volume do answer the question of how do I do it? Like, how do I create a balance? So I think there are 33 chapters in that book, which give you examples from different contexts of how you can actually do it. So as teachers, I think we need to rethink.
Definitely.
I just want to end with one last comment that the other day I was in Doha presenting at Doha Institute, where I walked the audience through my own journey of being multilingual learner or multilingual speaker of Urdu, Punjabi, Sindhi, and some Pashto at home, to becoming a monolingual learner and English language teacher after going through education and and training, to going back into classroom and seeing my students struggling, and then becoming a multilingual educator or a researcher. So that's a transition which has happened in my life as an English language teacher, and I may be able to come back to that discussion at some point and maybe do a recording of my own transition. So I think as research teachers, we need to reflect upon where we are, what our students' needs are, and then how we want to accommodate them in a better way.
Thank you, Kashif. I think a lot of us who've lived outside Pakistan can resonate with the same learning journey. And then I think the change is happening in Pakistan as well, as I've learned from my teaching experiences here. While you were talking, I realized that I should share this, and those of us who are in Pakistan may be familiar with this. There was a very unfortunate incident recently of an English language teacher at a private school shaming a student for speaking in Urdu in the classroom, and the student was humiliated. I think it was a minor student, like perhaps a 10-year-old or so in a primary school. And then the parent got so annoyed that they put all of this on social media to say that the child was shamed for speaking in the mother tongue in the classroom in a private school which goes by English as the medium of instruction. So that was quite disappointing and sad for me as an English language teacher who likes to use different languages in the classroom. So I think there'll be a lot of relearning for language teachers as policy agents or as agents of teaching the English language. So it will definitely take some time, because we know that research is emerging in this area as well, at least in our context. In the Arab world, there is already some research of this strategy working. I have another project where we are researching institutional readiness of institutions in the Arab world, the readiness of the administration to let teachers implement multiple languages in the classroom for the purpose of achieving learning objectives. So we'll see what our findings are, but it seems like research is, it's on a roll in this area.
I think multilingualism is nothing new in South Asian context. Our societies are multilingual. Our classrooms have been multilingual for many years. It's that colonial period where we segregated societies into English only and associating with elitism, and then other languages and associating it with the lower level, which will work as labor class and support staff. So what we need to do is, I think, have more conversations like this, not at international platforms like this, but also at classroom levels, at meeting levels, and at curriculum levels. And people reflect upon those and reflect the social reality in their classrooms.
Definitely. So I'm quite happy at this stage to let audience members interact with you now. I think we're a nice group here, so I'm quite happy if people would like to speak, unmute, come on camera, speak to Kashif directly, or type in the chat box. If you type in the chat box, you'll have to go through me. If you speak, you'll interact directly with Kashif, which might be nice. So, sure. Any observations, any questions, please feel free to communicate now. And
I do speak Urdu and Punjabi, so
yes,
and I'd love to use them. So please do come in.
Yeah, I do know that one of my first experiences when I was first introduced to you as a possible research collaborative colleague is when when I actually noticed you speak in Punjabi in a TESOL presentation, and that threw me off. I'm like, when did Punjabi come into TESOL? And it was your presentation with Dudley, I believe.
Correct.
So that was quite impressive for me, and it got me totally interested in this part of the research. So thank you for doing that. I can see Saima wants to say something. Saima, go ahead, unmute yourself, speak directly.
Hello, everyone. I hope it is still morning everywhere. I know Kashif has not,
No, it's not.
nighttime. Thank you so much, Kashif, first of all, for presenting your wonderful work. I'm really interested in what you are doing, and wish you were really well for the future endeavors as well. When you were talking, I was intrigued by one of the ideas that you presented was the Mandarin language and the resentment that is found in Pakistan. So, have you come across any specific research about it? And are people investigating it properly, or is it just an assumption? Because on the LinkedIn, where I have lots of my connections, they are quite happy with the Mandarin language teaching in their departments, and people are giving lots of positive feedback on it. So I wanted to know your thoughts on it as well.
Just gonna post. I think this may be a way to advertise my work. I've just
has all
posted a
his
link.
ammunition. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go on. Go on.
A link to a chapter. So in that chapter, this is part of the first volume that we published in 2021 with Deadly and Christine. So in my observation, yes, Mandarin is being learned by people, and there are economic benefits of it. There are social benefits and political benefits of it. I think my take on this has been the way it is being promoted at the cost of local languages is problematic. So I have not built any case against English or Mandarin in my work. I've built a case against the way it is being done. So for example, in that chapter, you will notice that the schools I've looked at, the information they provide is all in English, which mandates that to learn Mandarin, you must be a speaker of English. I mean, for God's sake, it's Pakistan, people speak Urdu, and your target audience is Urdu. The lowest you could do for those people is provide that information in Urdu or Punjabi or some regional languages based upon where the institution is. For example, some institutions in Punjab I've seen, all the information is in English. I've not been able to communicate with instructors because most of the websites don't have any contact information of an instructor. My future work will look at how Mandarin is being taught in the classroom. So I think we may be able to look at the medium of instruction and whether it is again English that we're mandating that you have to know English to learn Mandarin. So going back to my initial response, that I think I do not have any problem or any observation of Mandarin being a dangerous language. I think my work or other people's work is pointing to the way Mandarin is being promoted. And the second thing I want to say is that there's not been a lot of work, and I've noted that in my chapter, that most of the work has looked at, most of the work I've cited or looked at it for developing this chapter are, newspaper articles or blogs, which is, of course, not empirical all the time. So we need to do more work. We need to get together and we need to look at this. There was a conference on CPAC and language policy, I remember in 2021. But I don't know who presented there because I wasn't part of it. But I think stuff like that, more of that sort needs to happen so that people can have conversations about it. People can reflect or show their work in different, the way they're looking at Mandarin and the way Mandarin is being taught. So I hope I answered your questions, Sam.
Yes, definitely. I do agree that people, this area needs to be investigated because as far as universities are concerned, because it is assumed that students are graduate or undergraduate level, they already know English and they would learn Mandarin better, even if it is in English language. They are taught through English language. I think that this area needs to be investigated because at the school level and in the local institutions level where it is the Mandarin is really required as per the policy. I'm not much aware of the policy, but if it is required, this area does need to be explored, how things are done. Like you said, that it's not what that is important, it's how that is important. That yeah, I do agree with.
Thank you.
Yes, Janika.
I
I'm Dr.
believe
Asma Zamoor.
Saima. Okay, sorry, who is that?
I'm Dr. Asma Zamoor. I would like to add something.
Okay,
I've been teaching for the last 36 years. I'm the most active, I think, among you. I'd like to begin with sharing an experience I had when I was doing my graduation. That used to be called BA then. Once, you see, language used to be taught through literature then. And once the teacher asked a student to get up and start reading from the textbook, she started reading, and the teacher asked, you see, at that time it was just thought that use of first language while in the English class was something really bad. And the teachers never used to speak in Urdu in our classes. So the teacher asked the girl, stopped it. She pronounced something wrong. She said, say again. The girl said, say again. And it went on repeating for quite some time. I didn't know anything of the code switching or the code mixing or the first language and the second language as such then. But I do realize that if the teacher has stopped for a while and explained what she wanted her to do in Urdu, that might have solved the problem. And then I did a bit of research on code switching in the class. And what I personally feel that first language, whether it's Urdu, English, or our regional languages, for example, I am Punjabi. I know a lot of varieties of Punjabi, but we do not use it as such at home. But I do know Urdu. And if in order to make the students understand, at times you fall back on the use of the first language or the regional language, that is not something bad. And I don't think it is considered as something like a stigma today. But I would like to refer to an interesting research I've done. We've been doing a research study in collaboration with AGC and University of Leeds. And we have to write a chapter each for a book published by the British Council later on. And I did the chapter on code switching. I designed a questionnaire for the teachers and the students. And when I asked the students, would you like the teachers to use Urdu in the class to make you understand? Strangely enough, majority of said no. And if when I asked the teacher whether you use first language in the class, I don't know why, but they said no. But I've worked as a head of department for quite some time and visited many classes, class observation, all these things. What I think is that reality is quite different. Why do our researches are not quite useful? Because we do not speak the truth while researching or while you see being a participant in some research. All these things have to be changed. And as far as our language policy is concerned, I'm sorry to say, as all the other policies are, we have never have a consistency in any policy. And a lot of experimentation has really done something wrong. But even then, I'm almost at the conclusion of my teaching career. I taught language, I taught literature, and literature is my basic, but I taught linguistics as well, discourse analysis and critical discourse analysis. What I feel is...
So, Dr. Asma, I'm sorry, your voice is cracking, and I'm not sure if Kashif got the entire question. We've
somewhat.
heard you talk about somewhat.
Okay.
So,
Okay,
yeah,
which,
I'm sorry, your
can
voice kept cracking, and which is why I've put my head into
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so
That's
sorry.
okay.
I'll be near to the laptop now. Well,
That's okay. So,
it's not,
Kashif, from
actually a
whatever you
question.
understood, could you perhaps respond to Dr. Asma?
Yeah, I think I want to
Actually, I was sharing my experience being
Okay,
a practitioner of language.
Mhm.
Two things I would like to point out. Using first language as a resource to put the students at ease to keep the ball rolling is not something bad. And then in research, we'll have to be honest. If we use language, first language, in teaching the second language, and if it is beneficial, the students and the teachers should be honest enough to admit to it. I mean, there's no harm in it. And language policy has to be determined and it should be consistent. But despite all the odds, I'm happy to say that we can make our students learn, and they have been working wonders around the world.
Kashif?
Yeah, well, thanks for the comment. I think I want to go back to the study you were referring to, where the students and the teacher have said that there's a preference for using just English versus other languages. I think in one of the things I've done in the chapter is also point to the data sources that we draw our findings from. I know there's a lot of usage of quantitative data, which is collected through surveys. But I think there's been a kind of a change in multiple sources of data as well. So in addition to collecting data through surveys where you could have a data set of how people are saying they think, maybe we also observe them in the classroom and outside of the classroom and see how they're using different languages. And probably that can give a better picture. And what you said is very interesting, that why people don't tell the truth, that there is importance of mother tongue. I think it's because of the monolingual ideologies. We think English is a superior language and other languages cannot exist with it. So that's why people don't feel comfortable speaking those languages.
We have done a lot of harm while promoting this idea to Urdu.
Sadly, that's true. Yeah, and I think this is where Kashif says we need more research, and I definitely agree with him. So thank you for sharing your personal experience. That was, from whatever we caught, I think I could resonate with, I could relate to the use of English literature to teach English language, because I did study in Pakistan for a couple of years, so I had a similar experience. Okay, anybody else? Any observation, any question? Just feel free to speak.
I think I'm going to go back to the use of Urdu. इस तरह के प्लेटफॉर्म्स पे I think हमें ये भी करना चाहिए कि हम as a teacher हमें कुछ मॉडल भी करना चाहिए, हम दिखाएं स्टूडेंट्स को. अब जैसे डॉक्टर आसमा ने कहा कि उस टीचर ने खुद भी कभी उर्दू यूज नहीं की. अब अगर मैं खुद भी कभी उर्दू या पंजाबी अपनी क्लासरूम में यूज ना करूं, तो I don't think my students will ever do that. तो हमें एज ए टीचर भी कुछ जो है वो डिमॉन्स्ट्रेट करना चाहिए, कुछ प्रमोट करना चाहिए हमारी क्लासरूम में कि आप इंग्लिश के अलावा पंजाबी भी बोल सकते हैं, उर्दू भी बोल सकते हैं. अब मैंने अपनी प्रेजेंटेशंस में कतर में पंजाबी का इस्तेमाल किया है क्लासरूम में, और मैंने उनको उसमें कुछ रिफ्लेक्ट किया है कि कैसे मैंने उर्दू, पंजाबी और अरबिक के दरमियान एक कनेक्शन क्रिएट किया है जब मैं लॉयर्स को पढ़ा रहा था वहाँ पे, या लीगल इंग्लिश पढ़ा रहा था. तो आई थिंक एज इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज टीचर्स अगर हम इस तरह की कुछ एक्टिविटीज प्रमोट करें जहाँ हम स्टूडेंट्स को दिखाएं कि सोसाइटी में जैसे जुबानें इस्तेमाल होती हैं उसी तरह से क्लासरूम में भी हो सकती हैं। उसी तरह से हम जैसे हम इनफॉर्मल वे में लर्न करते हैं, हम फॉर्मल वे में भी उसी तरह से लर्न कर सकते हैं। तो आई थिंक शायद उनकी हाँ भी सच बोलने की अहलियत जो या जो काबिलियत आपने जिसका जिक्र किया वो पैदा हो जाए कि वो सही तरह से बता सकें कि हमारे मसाइल क्या हैं। जो मोनोलिंगुअल आइडियोलॉजीज हैं उन्होंने इतना हमें हमारे ज़हनों को जो है वो प्रिपेयर कर दिया है या ब्रेन वॉश कर दिया है कि इंग्लिश इज अ सुपीरियर लैंग्वेज एंड एवरी अदर लैंग्वेज इज नॉट अ सुपीरियर लैंग्वेज। आई थिंक उसको डिसमेंटल उसको कन्फ्रंट करने की जरूरत है और हम सब अपना किरदार अदा कर सकते हैं उसमें एज इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज टीचर्स और रिसर्चर्स और आई थिंक दैट्स व्हाई वी आर हियर, दैट्स व्हाट वी आर ट्राइंग टू डू हियर।
I fully agree,
Kashif,
Kashif,
thank you
but
so
then
much.
again, there are institutional policies, there are government policies, and there are personal confidence as well that matters a lot. Because, you know, like you said, that because of the hegemony of English language, we are already enslaved many. And I don't know how long it will take to just get out of the shackles of this hegemonic mindset. So yes, that is something very important. We must make efforts. We must think, at least prepare ourselves as teachers. And but then there are circumstances that are beyond our control. For example, institution policies, like in Pakistan, it may be implemented. There is still hope that because we are citizens of Pakistan and we have lots of teaching experience there, we know people, and we can still practice some sort of autonomy in our classrooms. But then if you are in the other countries, I don't know where you're working, what you can do now, but for the Arab countries especially, your teachers don't have much autonomy. There's a fixed syllabus, there are fixed rules, you have to follow them. If you go beyond and outside of those rules, then you are going to be in a problem. So that is something also need to be considered. There are lots and lots of factors, and some things are just beyond our control. But whenever, even though all of these restrictions, I still feel that no matter how much restrictions are on a language teacher, they still have some level of autonomy inside the classroom. So they can still practice. And I'm also a big fan of critical pedagogy as well. So not only this translanguaging is very important, but also we can practice some kind of autonomy inside the classroom. So yes, this is highly recommended.
Yeah, you're right. I think, but I mean, I also want to highlight here that while we promote multilingualism, while we promote critical literacies in our classrooms, we also need to point to bad practices, which make these movements and efforts look bad. I mean, there are people who just go to the first language every time they get stuck and they don't try. So if the first language is being used as a resource and then it leads to the learning of the target language, and I think that gives a very good example of how multilingualism actually works. And some of the sessions I've had in the past, I think there was one with the teacher development webinar, which was also recorded. That's where I pointed to this tension, where as teachers, you are bound by the curriculum and the institutional or the program policy, but then you create windows for yourself. You create ways for you to bring in other languages as resources. For example, when I was teaching lawyers, I would ask them to watch movies with Arabic subtitles, but then write their reflection in English, and then come back and give the presentation in English. So I think we, as teachers, we can still create some opportunities for our students to bring different languages in the classroom and then promote, different ways of learning. But yes, there are challenges, and then the leadership also need to reorient the way they are seeing language teaching and learning and how they see the value of different languages. So it's a collective work. Not only one person can do it.
It is. I absolutely agree. And this is such an insightful thing to say. While you both were talking about this, I went back to see Dr. Asma's comment about English. And she's actually said, which is so true, English is not an imposed language on us anymore. It is our second language, because remember I said that every person who is not a non-Pakistan Urdu English mix करके बोलते हैं, and then कभी हम surprise हो जाते हैं कि बोल रहे हैं. So it's our second language, and all the visually acceptable, but we as users of the language, we accept those variations. So a lot is happening here, and I think for us, all of us who are researchers here, it's more important to focus on our role in the classroom. From all of our discussion today, our role as agents of implementing the medium of instruction.
Right, and I think we also need to model that different languages can coexist.
That's critical, and I believe most of you are likely to agree. Other than policies, we.
Sorry, go on.
मैं बेसिकली इंग्लिश लिटरेचर की टीचर हूँ, लेकिन मैं अपने स्टूडेंट्स को हमेशा ये कहती हूँ कि वो उर्दू लिटरेचर में से भी कुछ पढ़ें. फॉर एग्जांपल, आई आस्क देम टू स्टडी गालिब, क्योंकि अगर आपको अपनी जुबान का अदब समझ नहीं आता तो मेरा ख्याल है कि आपको किसी जुबान का अदब भी समझ नहीं आता. पॉइंट ऑफ रेफरेंस के तौर पे हम यूज कर सकते हैं इसको भी, एंड यू कैन कंपेयर एंड कंट्रास्ट. उसके अलावा वैसे भी आप जो लिविंग रियलिटी इर्द गिर्द होती है, अगर आप उसको समझते हैं तो वो बेहतर कर सकते हैं. हालांकि इट्स नॉट अ पार्ट ऑफ इंग्लिश करिकुलम, लेकिन मैं ये समझती हूँ कि इससे भी उनको फर्क पड़ा. लेकिन मुझे अफसोस हुआ ये जान के कि उनमें से मेजॉरिटी गालिब के नाम से भी वाकिफ नहीं थी. तो दिस इज समथिंग वेरी अनफॉर्चुनेट. दिस इज समथिंग वेरी अनफॉर्चुनेट. और मेरा ख्याल है जब तक कि एकेडेमिया ये कोशिश नहीं करेगा ना कि अपनी जुबान प्रॉपर सीखें. असल में अब तो डायलेमा ये है कि हमारे बच्चों को इंग्लिश तो जितनी भी आती है या नहीं आती, उर्दू भी नहीं आती. प्रॉपर उर्दू की अगर आप बात करें ना, लिखनी आती है और ना उस तरह से बोलनी आती है. तो वो जब तक आप अपनी जुबान अच्छी तरह नहीं सीख सकते, मैं नहीं समझती कि आप किसी दूसरी जुबान को उस तरह से मास्टर कर सकते हैं. तो इसको हमें एज रिसोर्स जरूर करना चाहिए. दूसरा, लैंग्वेज पॉलिसी में रीजनल लैंग्वेजेस बहुत हैं, लेकिन जब ये कहते हैं ना, आपने भी इसको मेंशन किया कि 7% लोग उर्दू बोलते हैं, मैं इससे बिल्कुल एग्री नहीं करती. क्योंकि कराची से पेशावर, बलूचिस्तान, हर सूबे का मैंने सफर किया है और वहाँ लोग उर्दू समझते भी हैं और बोलते भी हैं. सिर्फ अगर आप पंजाब की बात करें तो हाफ ऑफ द पाकिस्तानी पॉपुलेशन इज फ्रॉम पंजाब. हम सब समझते हैं, हमारे घर में काम करने वाले भी सारे उर्दू बोलते हैं. तो हम ये बिल्कुल नहीं कह सकते कि 7% लोग बोलते हैं. वो आप वाली बात है. अगर आप सिर्फ उर्दू स्पीकिंग लोगों का नंबर लेते हैं ना, दैट माइट बी डिफरेंट, वो जो एक खास एक्सेंट में बोलते हैं. लेकिन उर्दू इज अ वाइडली अंडरस्टूड लैंग्वेज इन पाकिस्तान. तो इस प्रेस्टीज को इसको दे के बजाय दुनिया यही कहती रही कि ये तो हमारी जुबान ही नहीं है, ये सब 7% लोगों की जुबान है, तो उर्दू प्रॉपर सिखाई जाए. अब फिर आप इंग्लिश प्रॉपर सिखाने की तरफ बढ़ेंगे. दिस इज व्हाट आई फील. अपने लंबे करियर में मेरा ये ख्याल है कि इस तरह की पॉलिसीज बनानी चाहिए.
जी बिल्कुल.
So I did disappear briefly for a while, and I'm back just before we disappear again. I have put Kashif's chapter in the chat box. I did that previously. अगर आप अभी तो मैंने दोबारा डाल दिया, अगर आपने पहले देखा है तो उसको आप डाउनलोड करें. इसी चैप्टर से सारी हमारी डिस्कशन स्टार्ट हुई थी. और एक फाइल भी डाली है मैंने, एक्सेल फाइल. And on that file, you're welcome to put up your name and emails for our upcoming sessions. I think I will definitely invite Kashif back again because he's just generated so much discussion and interest. As I've always mentioned at all of my sessions, one of the primary reasons for engaging with researchers who've published, all Pakistani researchers who've published in this volume that I've put up again, the primary reason is to engage more researchers in Pakistan so that their research can be showcased outside Pakistan. With my realization has been in the last 4 years that we have such a rich research environment. I've lived abroad, I've studied abroad, I have not seen a lot of that research in the books and the journals that I've read to be able to do that. And I'm grateful to my colleagues, people like Kashif. Saima's done one last month as well. She's here too. I'm grateful to my associated. And for those of you who are here, I would like you to know that my colleagues who come to these sessions are open to more collaborative research. And I have that discussion with them before we do a session. So I know I've spoken to Saima about that. Kashif and I had that as well. So in this area that we discuss research, if you're interested, get in touch with me direct on have at my, and I will connect you. So happy to do that. So make sure before you leave, you put in your contact into that Excel file. Unfortunately, the internet connection seems a bit funny today. And yeah, that here we are, we're managing. So with this for me, I'm going to say thank you so much to Kashif. I know it's probably closer 40 minutes to midnight for you now, so I appreciate that you made all this time. And if you have any comments, Kashif, you're welcome to that, and then I'm happy to let you go and sleep.
No, I think it was an engaging session, and I really like to interact with people. So
Kashif?
Yeah. So thank you for the invitation. I look forward to future sessions.
Okay. Inshallah, I will be inviting you back again because I think we've opened something, Pandora box, ELT, in a positive sense. And I think I really want you to come back at another time so that we can talk a little Right then, with this,
Sure.
I will stop the recording.